Hi, everybody. I'm Amanda Edwards, and I am so excited about Juneteenth. And I have here with me the one and only Alana Edwards Holloway. And why am I sitting here with Alana? Well, very simple. She has a very interesting take and experience with Juneteenth now that we're celebrating the federal holiday. And she has a very interesting take with Juneteenth because she is the daughter of the late Al Edwards, our former state rep in Houston, who happened to have founded the holiday here in Texas known as Juneteenth. So we want to thank her, welcome her for being here with us today and sharing a little bit more about her experience growing up, watching her father and maneuver and make sure that we had something to celebrate known as Juneteenth, and more importantly, talk about the legacy left behind. Alana, I want to thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Amanda. I'm so happy to be here, and I'm so happy to be able to sit here and talk with you today. So I'm excited to talk about Juneteenth and all of the excitement around it, being that it is now a federal holiday. So thank you for having me.
You're most welcome. And so let's start with that, because I know that while here in Texas, we have celebrated Juneteenth for quite some time, and we often have different traditions that people, undertake. And sometimes people are going to Emancipation Park. Tell us, for those that don't know here in Texas, but also for those that don't know elsewhere, what is Juneteenth?
Well, Juneteenth is the celebration of June 19th, 1865, and that is when Union Army General Gordon Granger came to Galveston and read the orders that Texas would now be the last state to release their slaves. Texas still was holding on to 250,000 slaves 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. And so this marks the day officially that every slave was free, even though slavery had been abolished 2.5 years before.
Wow. So 2.5 years later, the slaves were in Texas freed, and probably most other places, they didn't even know whether or not that was taking place, right? That was still happening.
Yes. So that's why we celebrate Juneteenth. That's why it's on that date, because that's the official date that all slaves were freed at that point.
And so after Juneteenth, after we finally had all slaves freed in our country, there began to be a tradition where people would celebrate that freedom here in Texas. Can you share a little bit more about that and Emancipation Park and kind of how that all came to be?
Well, there were definitely traditions that were happening. Of course, my father did not create Juneteenth. Juneteenth was already happening, and there were people that were doing celebrations, but it wasn't recognized statewide and surely not nationwide. And so that's where he began to get his excitement about Juneteenth, because he joined in those celebrations even prior to being a state representative. So he began to celebrate those traditions with a Reverend C. Anderson Davis, who was very instrumental in making the Juneteenth Proclamation, which is what my father presented in 1979 for House Bill 1016 to the legislature. So that's how his excitement and his zeal came about for making sure that Juneteenth was recognized throughout the state and throughout the nation in a real meaningful way. Of course, you had pockets of celebrations and celebrations at parks, but it wasn't something that was recognized like many of our other holidays that, it should have gotten the recognition it deserved, and it wasn't happening. And so that's what caused him to then introduce the bill in the legislature.
And so what did he want? I guess, what was his motivation? Just to make sure that people knew their history?
Well, yes, he was a big historian. And so he wanted everyone to know, of course, the importance of knowing that all slaves had been free. I think some people did not understand his push for this. They didn't always understand, like, okay, well, what's the big deal about Juneteenth? But what they didn't understand was that he wanted the acknowledgement and the respect of the holiday statewide and ultimately nationwide. And so, of course, he had to lay the groundwork. It can't become nationwide until it becomes statewide. And so throughout his legislative career, when he was the Democratic National Committee chairman, the Black Legislative Caucus chairman, he used that to then appeal to other states to then pass the same legislature. And so 35 more states joined in because he knew that in order to get it to become nationwide, we had to then get all of the states to join in. So he was able to see 35 more states actually pass the same bill.
Excellent. And so you were up close and personal. I know to you, he was your dad, and for us, he was our state rep. But tell us a little bit more about what obstacles you saw your dad experience when he was on that journey. Were there
Well,
some unknown or interesting
definitely.
alignments, and what happened?
Definitely, because we're talking about around 1980. So, of course, that was before I was born. But I do know of the stories of where, he had to appeal to some very conservative politicians that did not agree with supporting it being a state holiday. They didn't agree with supporting Juneteenth, and so he had to appeal to people that were not always the nicest or the most supportive of his mission. During that time, there were only 15 legislators in the House in 1980, and so he didn't have all of their support. And so it was a fight. It was definitely a fight. There were times that he was discouraged, but he never stopped. And so that taught myself, my brothers, Alana Edwards II and Jason Edwards, who have now taken the torch on to continue his work, that you don't give up. It doesn't matter if everyone doesn't believe in your purpose. He knew his purpose and he knew the outcome that he wanted to see. And so that was it becoming a federal holiday. And so even though he didn't get to see the very last part, that was what his work was dedicated to for over 40 years.
Wow, that's incredible. 40 years worth of work. And he passed shortly before it became a federal holiday. What do you think your dad would say today? I'm sure he would be celebrating without a doubt.
Oh my, yes, he would. He would say we did it. He always said that it would become a national holiday. That was his goal. And so laying the groundwork, he didn't want to stop at the state, but he knew he had to start at the state. And so he would just be so excited. I know that if he were here, I mean, he would be ecstatic to be at all of the events and to just be so happy to know that we have finally made it here. But he would also say our work is not over. And so for my father, the work was never over. You never stop and you continue to push the mission. And so what he would say now is that, okay, we've gotten this done. What's next? And so that's where we come in because we know that what's next is now, let's make sure that it's really acknowledged. Let's make sure that some of the norms change and that some of the respect that we give to other federal holidays and to people that protect our country, that same respect should be given to the 400 million slaves who on their backs this country was built, and so they deserve that same respect. And so that's where we continue the work. And so not just his children, but of course the youth that we teach and all of the politicians and everyone that's in support of the mission so that we can make sure that the respect is given to those who lost their lives, lost their liberty, and ultimately their own pursuit of their happiness that they weren't allowed to have.
Well, that's an incredible way to summarize the legacy of Juneteenth. I appreciate not just your willingness to be with me here today, but also the work that you and your family has done over the years to make sure that we not just appreciate history, but live the experience and live out the legacy of work that has been done and that is continuing to be done. So I appreciate the work that you do in the community. I appreciate the work your father has done and the legacy he's left for others to follow in his footsteps. So again, thank you, thank you, thank you. And my last question to you is, how will you be telling, I know you are a principal, how will you be telling your students to celebrate Juneteenth?
Well, today they were able to focus on what the Juneteenth flag was, and they also had to write about how they want to make a change in the community and in the state and in the world. Because the idea is to show them that the work that their ancestors have done, the work that politicians do every day, they can do that same work. And so with the youth, we have to teach them that we're the example, we're the model. And so they get so excited because that's my dad. But I'm like, I had to work and I had to make sure that I was out there with him. We were walking the pavement. I was taught at a young age, what an election was and what it was to give to the community. And so, although not necessarily a politician, but as a leader of a school, I make sure that I work in the community and do that same work. And so that's what we have to teach our youth. And that's what our organization is about, Juneteenth USA. And so for more information, people can go to juneteenthusa.org to get more information about our advocacy organization. And if they would like to help, if they would like to volunteer, and just find out more information and get educated, because my father was passionate about education and passionate about hard work. And so my brothers and I, we are no stranger to hard work. We stay up hours of the night thinking of ways to make sure that our youth, is educated. And so now we are also working on how we can add this to the curriculum. I'm passionate about it being in the textbooks, the real history being in the textbooks, so that our scholars can know this is where I came from. How does this affect my present life? And this is how it will affect my future. So they can understand that the things that happened in the past, they don't define you. You understand that they were wrong. And so that way we know in the future it will never happen again. And so that's what this is all about, making sure that we teach our youth and educate them so that they can carry the torch.
Well, Alana, you summarized it perfectly. So I appreciate the work that you do, the work you continue to do and have done. And I encourage everyone to learn more about Juneteenth. Visit juneteenth.org, as was stated, and check it out and figure out how in your life and in your family and in your community, how you make the legacy of Juneteenth something that motivates you to do more, to serve more, and of course, reach for more. So again, thank you, Alana. You've been so gracious with your time today, and I've enjoyed having this conversation with you.